Welcome back to the Secret World of Og, Chapter 11, The Shooting of Captain Hook. In the square in the middle of town, every eye was turned on Peter as, his 10-gallon hat pulled low over his eyes, he advanced unwillingly toward the center of the crowd. "Sheriff," said the chief, importantly, adjusting his comic nose, "do your duty. There's a spy amongst us. Indeed, I have reason to believe that the city is crammed with spies." And he looked around mysteriously and imposingly to make sure that his words had effect. "They are everywhere," he said in a hoarse whisper. The crowd murmured and drew together, each man eyeing his neighbor suspiciously. "Come on, Sheriff," said the chief impatiently. "Have you caught the spy yet?" He reminded Peter of Freddie Frith, a boy he sometimes played with who was always being bossy. "Not yet," said Peter, not knowing what else to say. He saw Captain Hook on the edge of the crowd, grinning cheerfully at him. Well, thought Peter, if he wants to be a villain, he might as well be a real one. "He's the spy," Peter said, pointing at Captain Hook. "I might have known it," exclaimed the chief. "Fine police work, Sheriff. Don't move, spy. The sheriff has an itchy trigger finger." Far from being upset by this turn of events, Captain Hook looked positively delighted. "How did you trap me?" he asked, raising his hands above his head and bounding forward. "I'm a master spy," he said to the chief. "Take him to the jail, Sheriff," said the chief. "The crowd's getting ugly." "Tell them to go home," said Peter. "Disperse!" cried the chief in a thundering voice. "Translate that," he added, turning to the interpreter. "Og!" shouted the interpreter, and the crowd began to melt away. "Come on," said Peter, and the three of them, Peter, Captain Hook, and the chief, headed down the street toward the cave which served as a jail. As they reached the entrance, Peter turned to the chief. "I forgot," he said mildly. "You're a hostage. Stick him up." And he poked his cap pistol in the green man's midriff. The chief looked startled and raised his hands. "I'm the real spy," Peter said proudly. "Oh, no, you're not," said Captain Hook. "That's not a bit fair. I'm the spy. You said I could be. You promised." "No," said Peter. "It's my turn now." And he marched the two of them into the cave where Penny, in an absolute frenzy of anxiety, was awaiting them. As Peter entered, he noticed that the pollywog had somehow got back inside the cell again and was tearing up the real sheriff's comic books, much to the green man's annoyance. "Here's the hostage, Penny," Peter said. "I brought two." "Oh, I like being a hostage," burbled Captain Hook. "I don't believe I've ever been a hostage before." "That's not fair," shouted the chief. "I'm the hostage. He said I was." And the two queer green people began to quarrel among themselves. "Who is he?" Penny asked Peter, pointing to the chief. "Boss," said Peter. "I think he likes being stuck up." "Well," said the chief conversationally, "it does relieve the monotony, you know." "Are you really the boss of all this?" Penny asked. "Definitely," the green man answered importantly. "Actually, my real title, handed down from generation to generation, is the Grand Exalted Keeper of the Holy Mushroom Patch. Or, if you prefer the original language, Og, 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 Og." "Oh," said Penny. "Only there is no Holy Mushroom Patch," the Grand Exalted Keeper added. "We ate it. That was during the Great War with the Ogs." "The Ogs?" "They live across the river. We used to fight a lot for something to do. Of course, since we got the tunnels working, there's no more need." "I don't understand all of this," said Penny. "Who are you, anyway? And how long have you lived down here?" "Who are we?" said the chief in surprise. "Well, I like that. We're us." "Who are you, for that matter?" asked Captain Hook. "I'm Penny." "I'm Peter," said Peter politely. "But if the people across the river are called Ogs, then what are you people called?" Penny wanted to know. "We haven't got any name," the chief said. "They call us Ogs, for that matter." "It's the only word we have, you see," said Captain Hook, a bit apologetically. "But now we have the new language, we've all got separate names," the chief said, "just like you. It's ever so much more fun. At the moment, I'm Wyatt Earp. I got it out of classic comics. I think it's quite a nifty name, don't you?" "What do you mean, at the moment?" Penny asked. "Oh, well, we change a lot. I mean, it would be very selfish of me to use Wyatt Earp all the time. Somebody else will want it." "1 week," said Captain Hook wistfully. "1 week I was that villain Jesse James. Tell me, what is Jesse James really like? I mean, really?" "How should I know?" said Penny. The conversation, she felt, was getting off on a very queer tack indeed. "But don't you live up there with him?" "Not with him, silly. He's in books. Besides, I'm sure he must have been dead for years and years." "Dead?" The captain looked shocked, and Penny thought he was going to cry. "You mean some hombre outdrew him? They had ought to strung him up." And he clenched his fists tightly in anger and sorrow. "He died with his boots on," said Peter, who knew all about Jesse James. "It all happened years ago," Penny said. She was a little vague as to when it actually had happened. Probably 100 years ago, she added, guessing. It was the others' turn to look confused, and Penny seized the chance to ask her question again. "How long have you people lived down here?" "How long? Why, always. This is where we live." "But why? Why don't you live up above like everybody else?" "Well, everybody else doesn't live up above," the chief said. "There are plenty down here, you know, all along the big river, and probably many more on smaller branches we don't know about." "But if you're so crazy for comic books and toys and funny hats and things, why don't you just come up and live like the rest of us?" Penny persisted. The chief gave her a queer look. "You don't really mean that," he said finally. "Of course I mean it." "You wouldn't like us up there at all," said the little man. "We're green, you know. We're different." "Well, for heaven's sakes," Penny said, exasperated. "We've got all colors up above, too. We haven't anybody green, but we have them white and brown and yellow and black. So there." "And how are these people treated?" the little green man said. "Well," said Penny uneasily, "it all depends, I guess." "That's why we stay down here," the little man said. Penny didn't at all like the trend of this talk, but she did see the green man's point. "I guess the poor little things wouldn't have a very good time of it up above at that," she told herself. "At school, the big boys would laugh at them." "But the tunnels?" she asked, trying to change the subject. "Why do you have the tunnels?" "You built a building right on top of one," said the chief petulantly. "That wasn't fair, you know. It's difficult enough as it is to keep them from filling up with mud and snow." "Can't you start from the beginning, about the tunnels?" Penny asked. "Well, in the beginning, we didn't have tunnels," the chief said. "In the old days, we lived down here without any kind of contact with the world above. And, oh, it was dull," said Captain Hook mournfully. "Yes," said the chief, "it was dull. The only cloth we had to wear was the skin we scraped off the rocks. The only food we had were the mushrooms." "Ah, those mushrooms," said Captain Hook, making a face. "I like mushrooms," Peter said. "Well, you wouldn't if that's all you had," the chief said. "Why, we had mushroom porridge, mushroom stew, mushroom cake, mushroom pie, mushroom soup, mushroom candies, mushroom cookies, mushroom salad, mushroom milk, mushroom omelet, mushroom gruel." "Nourishing, mind you," cried Captain Hook with a horrible wink. "Full of rich, juicy vitamins and all that." "Like eating pablum all day," said Peter sympathetically. "We built things out of dry mushroom stalks," the chief continued. "When properly prepared, they are rather like a very light wood. We still use them a good deal." "What did you do for fun?" Penny asked. "There wasn't any fun," cried Captain Hook, raising his eyebrows and lowering them again. "We didn't know about fun. All we did was eat mushrooms and talk to ourselves in that awful language, og, 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 all day long." "Why didn't you invent other words?" Penny asked. "We didn't know we could," said the chief. "Besides, you know, it's very much easier to learn things if you only have one word. It made school very simple. Spelling was simple. Grammar was only slightly more difficult." Mushroom pie, mushroom milk, mushroom stew. 100 ways to cook mushrooms. "I was very bad at grammar," said Captain Hook sadly. "I could never understand that the plural of og was og, or that an objective of og was also og. Nor did I ever understand, I fear, that the first person singular of the verb og was og, while the third person plural was also og. As for the subjunctive, I could never master it." "History," said the chief, ignoring him, was summed up in a single word. Og! Thus the history books contained only one page with this one word on it, and the course was taught completely, including memory work and revisions, in not much more than 6 months. "I would think it wouldn't take much more than a day," said Penny. "Or maybe an hour?" "We like to be thorough down here," said the chief. "Besides, there was recess." "Recess?" "It was 5 months long." "Oh, how lovely!" cried Penny. "Imagine having 5 whole months of recess." "But do you see? There was absolutely nothing to do," exclaimed Captain Hook. "If you think it's fun to go around all day eating mushrooms and saying og to everybody, you are terribly wrong. Have you ever tried to get an idea across using the one word, og? It is extremely difficult. I know a lot of people still use the language, but they are lazy and lack imagination. I, for one, prefer to speak the majestic and rolling tones of those great Englishmen, Ebenezer Scrooge, Robinson Crusoe, Captain Hook, Wild Bill Hickok, and Garth Greatheart." "How did you come to learn it at all?" Penny asked. "It happened," said the chief, "that one day a party of men worked their way up the river in a mushroom boat, well above the waterfall. Nobody had been there before because people were afraid of a thing that they said lived way up there." "What kind of a thing?" Penny asked. "I'm coming to that. Life was so boring, finally, that a group of these men decided to have an adventure and go in search of the thing. It turned out to be a small brown animal who dug a hole right down to the river. It was just as afraid of them as they were of it." "Sounds like a gopher," Penny said, "or a mole." "Well, whatever it was, it had dug all the way down. The men who found the tunnel, for this was the first of the tunnels, clawed their way up until they came out into your world. They brought back some souvenirs they found lying around on the ground. They're in our museum now. What kind of souvenirs? Oh, a nail for one thing, and a comb, and an old straw hat. They caused an absolute sensation when they were first placed on exhibit. After that, the tunnel was used regularly. Some of the people learned to snare rabbits, and that was mainly what we went after. We ate mushrooms with rabbit sauce. Yum, yum. Most people would say it was rabbit with mushroom sauce, Penny told him. It all depends on what you're used to, the chief said. Then what happened? Said Penny, entranced at the story. Well, the thing got organized as time went on. Companies were formed to exploit the tunnels, for several more were quickly dug. Then there were trading companies formed to send expeditions to the top. We could only go at certain times, usually when it was dark up above, and only when it was warm. As the men grew more experienced, they began to find all sorts of things lying around in the grass and in the woods. When they found the first picture book, well, you can imagine the excitement. That was how we learned to talk like you, the little man said, by studying the pictures. And sometimes the explorers would listen to your people as they played their games, being cowboys and things. Those would be children, Penny exclaimed. Oh, we didn't know. Are you children? Yes, of course. How interesting. I thought you were very old and grown up. Thank you, said Penny. I'm almost grown up, she added quickly, and certainly she felt very grown up at this point. Well, said the chief, things became much more lively after the tunnels were properly organized. Now, as you see, we have everything down here that you have in your world. We really are extremely modern and up to date, you know. He sounded very proud of it all, and Penny didn't have the heart to explain that all they really had were cast-off toys and books left lying around by careless children. I suppose, she thought, that the reason they talk mainly about comic book characters is that children don't usually leave good books lying around outside. She wondered if the Green Men had read Treasure Island in its original version, or The Count of Monte Cristo. Captain Hook would certainly enjoy those, she thought, and she made a mental note to leave a couple of old copies lying about in a conspicuous place, if she ever got back home again. We act just like you people too, the chief was explaining smugly. It's much more fun, you know, to pretend to be something you aren't. Yes, said Penny truthfully, I know. And she thought of the Pollywog, Earless Oztek, and Yukon King, all pretending like mad. And then she thought of herself, and the playhouse, and the dress-up clothes, and the grown-up tea parties, and she saw that she and the others weren't at all that different from the Green Men. The week I was Jesse James, I felt like a new man, Captain Hook remarked. I'm a garbage man part of the time, Peter told them sociably. Another question occurred to Penny. Do you always go up the river? Oh, always. Wouldn't it be easier to go down? Oh, no one ever goes down, the chief told her. That's where the snake people live. The snake people? Yes, terribly slithery monsters with beady eyes and forked tongues and slavering jaws. If you've never been down, how do you know? Oh, we've heard stories, said the chief darkly. What stories? From whom? Why, our fathers and mothers told us, and their fathers and mothers told them. We've got a big net across the river below, so the snake people can't swim up and attack us. How do you know it's not just another bit of imagination, like the thing who turned out to be a gopher or something? Penny asked him. You just don't understand, the chief said, shaking his head. This is real. And he shuddered a little at the thought of the terrible snake people. Well, said Penny politely, not wanting to make a big issue out of it. Thank you for telling us your story. Now it's getting late, and we'll have to go. Go? Said the little man. Yes, we have to go home for supper now, Penny said. Oh, you can't go, the chief said firmly. You'd tell. You'll have to stay down here. Tell? You mean about all of you? Exactly. Then we'd have parties of tourists prowling around down here, staring at us, peering into our homes and poking us with sticks. Oh no, that would never do. No, we can't have that. I won't be poked at by tourists. Well, we won't tell, Penny said. Anyway, we're going whether you like it or not. Now that she knew more about the green Oggs, Penny was much less afraid of them. You'll never make it alive, said Captain Hook, once more slipping into comic book talk. I shall do something dashing and desperate. I warn you, I can be very desperate, you know. And he assumed what he considered to be his desperate look, grimacing and hissing between his teeth, and clenching and unclenching his small fists, and rolling his eyes horribly beneath his enormous green eyebrows. We're taking you both with us as hostages, Penny said firmly, not in the least worried by the excitable green man. I knew no good would come of this, the chief muttered. It's all the fault of Garth Greatheart. Garth Greatheart! Penny wished Pamela were here to hear this. He's the one who insisted on cutting the hole in the floor of your house. He said it would be full of wonderful things. I warned him, but oh no, he wouldn't listen to my wise counsel. He thought you'd all gone out, and when he saw the rabbit without the ears, he decided to snatch it first. Then the other animal fell in, so they took them both. He sold the rabbit, but the other animal made such a terrible noise we were afraid of it, so we locked it up. We were going to pretend he was a monster. It would have been good fun. But it's all spoiled now. Come on, said Pete, shoving the cat pistol in his ribs. But just as he spoke, there was a terrifying commotion outside the door of the cave. Several green people went rushing past in stark terror. To her astonishment, Penny saw that Patsy was following in hot pursuit. Yukon King and Earless were right behind, both trying to bark like the big dogs on television. Patsy! Screamed Penny. You come right back here! There's no use shouting at her when she's this way, said Pamela, strolling quietly into the cave. She'll slow down in a moment. Outside the cave now, a crowd of green people was beginning to gather. Suddenly, while the children's attention was diverted, Captain Hook made a plunge for the door. Bang! Bang! Shouted Peter, whirling around and pointing the cat pistol at him. Bang! Bang! You're dead! Captain Hook twisted about, staggered, pressed his hand to his heart, made a gurgling noise in his throat, and slowly sank to his knees. It was his finest moment, as Penny said later. You got me, partner, he croaked as he tumbled over. He twitched a bit and then lay perfectly still. Oh, Peter, said Pamela, you've killed him. From the thickening crowd outside the cave, an angry murmur began to rise.